The meeting had been going for 40 minutes when my wife looked across the conference table at me and said, with the precise, calibrated calm of a woman who had practiced the sentence at least once before delivering it, that she had decided to restructure my role within the company. Restructure. That was the word she used. Not eliminate. Not demote. Restructure. The language of organizations that want to do something irreversible without using a word that sounds irreversible. The language of people who have decided what they are going to do and have spent considerable time finding the version of it that sounds like consideration. There were 11 people in that conference room, 4 members of the Caldwell Group investment team, who had flown in from New York that morning and who were sitting on the south side of the table with their laptops open and their expressions professionally neutral in the way that people who manage large amounts of other people's money learn to look neutral when they are in fact absorbing everything. 3 members of our senior leadership team. 2 board members. My wife's chief of staff, a sharp young woman named Priya, who took notes in a system so efficient it looked like a different language. And me. And Genevieve. My wife. The CEO of Harlan Meridian Consulting. The woman I had married 9 years ago in a small ceremony in Savannah, Georgia, with Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees and my mother crying in the second row, and Genevieve's father squeezing my hand at the altar and saying, "Son, she is a lot, but she is worth every bit of it," and me nodding and meaning it completely. She looked at me and she said the word restructure and she kept talking. She said that going forward my responsibilities would be narrowed, that the product development division I had built over 3 years would now report to Marcus Hale, our chief operating officer, a man I had hired, trained, and promoted. She said this had been a long-considered decision. She said the company was in a growth phase that required specialized leadership at every level. She said these things with the smooth, unhurried confidence of a woman who had given this speech in her head many times and had concluded that the best way to deliver it was in front of witnesses, because witnesses made it institutional rather than personal, because if it was institutional, then it was not about us. But it was about us. It was entirely and completely about us. And every person in that room with a functioning nervous system understood that, which is why no one spoke for 3 full seconds after she finished, and why the silence that followed had the particular texture of a room full of professionals deciding simultaneously whether to pretend they had not heard what they had just heard. I looked at her. She was looking at her notes, or the appearance of her notes. She was not reading anything. She was giving me time to respond without having to watch my face while I did it, because watching my face was the one thing she could not afford to do in front of 11 people and still maintain the performance she had entered the room to give. I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, because I had too much to say and none of it belonged in that room. Because the version of me that was sitting in that conference chair with my hands folded on the table had learned, over 9 years of marriage and 3 years of building a company inside a company, that the most powerful response to a public ambush is not a response at all. It is a stillness so complete that it forces everyone in the room to fill the silence themselves. And they did. Marcus cleared his throat. A board member shifted in his chair. One of the Caldwell Group analysts clicked his pen. Priya wrote something in her notebook with the focused efficiency of a woman who was performing the act of writing in order to have something to do with her hands. Genevieve finally looked up. Our eyes met, and I saw something in her face that she had not intended to put there, a flicker of something below the confidence, something that was not quite guilt and not quite doubt, but was the precursor to both, the look of a person who has done something they have been planning for weeks and has just, in the moment of doing it, arrived at the first honest question about whether it was right. I gave her nothing back, not anger, not hurt, not the wounded public dignity that would have confirmed whatever story she had built around the decision. I gave her the same expression I would have given a stranger delivering a quarterly report. Neutral, present, attentive, as though what she had just said was a piece of information I was filing, not a knife I was absorbing. She looked away first. My name is Nathan Hollis. I am 41 years old. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, in a neighborhood where ambition was not so much encouraged as assumed, where the expectation from parents and teachers and pastors and neighbors was not whether you would build something but what and when and how large. My father, Charles, was a civil engineer who designed bridges, which I have always thought was either a metaphor or a profession depending on whether you are feeling poetic or practical. My mother, Ruth, taught high school mathematics for 28 years and had the particular patience of a woman who had spent 3 decades watching students arrive at answers they did not believe they could reach, and who had learned that the teacher's job is not to give the answer, but to wait long enough for the student to find it. They raised me to understand that competence was invisible until it was necessary, and that necessity had a way of arriving at the most clarifying moments. I met Genevieve Harlan in 2013 at a business school event in Atlanta. She was finishing her MBA. I had already been working for 4 years at a strategy consulting firm called Apex Partners, where I had spent my time doing the kind of work that gets done in the background of other people's successes, the market analysis, the operational frameworks, the financial modeling that allowed other people to walk into rooms and sound brilliant. I was good at it. I was very good at it, and I had spent 4 years learning that being very good at background work makes you invisible in exactly the way that makes powerful people comfortable. Genevieve was not comfortable with invisibility. She was comfortable with rooms, with attention, with the particular energy of a woman who had spent her entire life preparing to be looked at and had decided to give the world its money's worth. She presented at the event with the confidence of someone twice her age and the clarity of someone who had already arrived at the destination she was describing. After her presentation, I walked up to her and told her that her market segmentation model had a structural assumption that would hold in an expansion market but collapse in a correction. She looked at me, the same way she always looked at me in those early days, as though I had said something that required her to recalibrate slightly, not because she was wrong but because she had not accounted for me. We argued about the model for 40 minutes. We had dinner for 3 hours. We were engaged 14 months later. She founded Harlan Meridian Consulting in 2015, the year we married. I was still at Apex, but I spent my evenings and weekends helping her build the firm, the financial models, the service architecture, the client acquisition strategy, the operational infrastructure that would allow her to scale from a one-person firm to something sustainable without losing the quality that would define her reputation. By 2017, Harlan Meridian had 8 employees and $2 million in annual revenue. Genevieve was the CEO and the face of the company. I was still at Apex, contributing in the evenings and on weekends, the invisible hand behind the visible face. In 2019, she asked me to come in full-time. She needed someone to build the product division, a line of proprietary consulting frameworks and tools that could be licensed to clients and would create recurring revenue independent of billable hours. It was the kind of work I had been doing at Apex for years. It was the kind of work I understood at a cellular level. And it was the kind of work that, when done well, is completely invisible to the people it benefits most. I left Apex. I joined Harlan Meridian as Executive Vice President of Product Development. My salary was lower than what I had been making. The equity arrangement we agreed on was generous on paper and dependent on conditions that had not yet been met. I accepted both because I believed in what we were building and because I believed in the person I was building it with. For 3 years I built the Meridian Framework, a proprietary consulting methodology that systematized the firm's approach to organizational transformation. The Harlan Diagnostic Suite, a set of assessment tools that clients use to evaluate their own operational health before engaging the firm. The Partnership Licensing Program, which allowed smaller consulting firms to use Harlan Meridian's tools in their own practice for a licensing fee that had, by the 3rd year, become the firm's 2nd largest revenue stream after direct client engagements. I built all of it, not alone. I had a team, eventually 12 people, all of whom reported to me, all of whom I had hired or promoted, none of whom were present in the conference room on the morning Genevieve restructured my role, because they were not invited. Psychologists call what Genevieve did a public authority displacement, the act of reducing a peer or partner's status in front of an audience as a means of re-establishing hierarchical clarity. It is most common in situations where the relationship between 2 people has become ambiguous in ways that the initiator finds threatening. The audience is not incidental. The audience is the mechanism. Without witnesses, the displacement is private and therefore contestable. With witnesses, it becomes institutional fact before the other person has had time to respond. She needed me to be smaller in front of the Caldwell group. The question I carried out of that conference room and into the rest of that day was why. I walked to my office after the meeting. It was the corner office on the 4th floor, the one with the window that faced east and caught the morning light at the angle that made everything in the room look warmer than it actually was. I had chosen this office not for its view, but for its proximity to my team's workspace, because I had always believed that the best thing a leader could do with a corner office was make it the least important room on the floor. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I had 14 unread emails. I did not read them. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline and I let myself feel, for exactly the amount of time it took to feel it completely, the full weight of what had just happened. Not the professional weight, the personal weight. The weight of a woman I had loved for 9 years deciding, in front of investors and board members and the chief of staff who had once told me I was the reason the firm had a culture worth preserving, that I was no longer worth my seat at the table she would not have had without me. I felt it. I let it be as large as it was. I did not minimize it or rationalize it or tell myself a story about how it was probably about business and not about us, because I knew it was about us. It was entirely about us. 3 weeks earlier, Genevieve and I had had the worst argument of our marriage. I am not going to detail every word of it because some things belong only to the people who said them, and some wounds deserve the dignity of privacy. What I will say is this. We had been struggling for 18 months. The company's growth had accelerated in ways that changed the dynamic between us. She was the CEO, I was her husband. In the office, those two facts created a friction that we had never adequately resolved, a permanent tension between authority and partnership that was too close to the surface to be ignored and too complicated to be fixed by any of the usual tools. She had begun over the course of those 18 months to treat me in company meetings the way she might treat a talented subordinate, talking over me, redirecting my contributions without acknowledgement, making decisions that fell within my division's scope without consulting me. Small things individually, the kind of things that can be explained by stress and workload and the particular blindness that comes with power. But they accumulated. The way small things always accumulate. Quietly, steadily, until the accumulation itself becomes the thing you are dealing with, rather than any individual piece of it. The argument 3 weeks before the meeting had been about Marcus Hale. Genevieve had been spending increasing amounts of time with Marcus in planning sessions that should have included me. Marcus was smart, ambitious, and politically skilled in the way that people who grow up watching power operate tend to be. He understood what Genevieve needed from the people around her, which was not the kind of truth I specialized in, but the kind of confirmation that powerful people are drawn to when they are uncertain and want to feel certain. I told her what I saw. She told me I was threatened. I told her threat was not the word I would have chosen and that the word I would have chosen was concerned, because what I saw in Marcus was not competition but flattery, operating as strategy, and flattery operating as strategy inside a company was a structural risk, not a personal one. She told me I needed to check my ego. I told her she needed to check her sources. We did not speak for 2 days. Then we spoke carefully and incompletely, and moved forward in the way that long-married people move forward. Not by resolving the thing, but by agreeing to carry it differently, until the carrying becomes habitual, and the weight becomes familiar. 3 weeks later, she restructured my role in front of the Caldwell group. I sat at my desk and looked at the Atlanta skyline and understood with the cold, clear precision of a man who had spent his career building frameworks for understanding organizational behavior, that the meeting had not been an accident. The Caldwell Group's presence had not been incidental. The restructuring had been timed to the investor's visit because the investor's presence was the mechanism. She needed institutional cover. She needed the decision to arrive inside a business context so that it could not be challenged on personal grounds. What she did not know, sitting at that conference table with her notes and her professional calm and her 11 witnesses, was that the Caldwell Group had been in contact with me separately. I need to go back 2 months. In May, I had received a LinkedIn message from a man named Elliot Caldwell. Not the firm, the man himself. Elliot was 52 years old, the founding partner of the Caldwell Group, which managed roughly $400 million in growth equity across a portfolio of professional services firms. They had been in conversations with Harlan Meridian for 8 months about a potential Series A investment of $8 million. Elliot's message was brief. He said he had been reviewing our materials and wanted to have a separate conversation with me, specifically about the product division's architecture and the licensing program's growth trajectory. He said his team had questions that he thought I was better positioned to answer than the standard investor relations process allowed. I replied. We scheduled a call. What followed over the next 6 weeks was a series of conversations that I did not tell Genevieve about, not because I was hiding something harmful, because I was protecting something fragile. What Elliot was telling me, carefully, and through the graduated directness of a man who had been in venture capital for 25 years and had learned to say the important thing after enough preamble that the listener has time to prepare for it, was that the Caldwell Group's interest in Harlan Meridian was not equally distributed across the firm. Their interest was disproportionately concentrated in the product division, in the Meridian framework, in the Harlan Diagnostic Suite, in the partnership licensing program, in the recurring revenue infrastructure I had built over 3 years that now accounted for 31% of the firm's total revenue and was projected, under conservative growth assumptions, to exceed direct consulting revenue within 4 years. Elliot was not investing in Harlan Meridian, the consulting firm. He was investing in the intellectual property and revenue architecture that I had built inside Harlan Meridian. He understood this. His team understood this. The question that had brought him to a separate conversation with me was whether I understood it, and whether I was prepared to have the conversation that would naturally follow from that understanding. I was. Over 6 weeks, Elliot and I had 7 calls. His team conducted a technical due diligence review of the product division's assets that was more thorough than anything we had done for standard investor presentations. They interviewed 3 of my team members with my knowledge and cooperation and without Genevieve's, because Elliot had specifically requested that the review remain compartmentalized until he was ready to discuss findings with the full leadership team. I had agreed to that. I had agreed because what I was hearing from Elliot told me something important about the company I had built inside my wife's company, and I needed to understand the full shape of it before I decided what to do with the understanding. The due diligence findings were not surprising to me. They may have been surprising to anyone who had been in that conference room on the morning of the restructuring meeting and had concluded, based on what they witnessed, that I was the less essential partner in the firm. The Meridian framework had been licensed to 43 independent consulting firms across 11 states. The Harlan Diagnostic Suite had a client renewal rate of 87%. The partnership licensing program had grown from $12,000 in year 1 to $1.4 million in year 3, with a projected year 4 revenue of $2.1 million based on the pipeline I had built and the conversations I had in progress. The product division was, by every metric the Caldwell Group used to evaluate investable assets, the most valuable thing Harlan Meridian owned. More valuable than the client roster. More valuable than the brand. More valuable than the CEO's reputation, which was considerable, and which I say without any desire to diminish it. Elliot had told me this directly on our 6th call. He had said, "Nathan, the honest answer to why we are here is that we are investing in what you built. The consulting practice is good. The team is strong. Genevieve is an exceptional operator. But the reason this deal pencils is the product revenue, and the product revenue exists because of you. We need to know that you are going to be here. We need to know what your role is going to look like. And we need to know whether your current arrangement reflects the value you are providing to this firm." I had told him that I intended to have a conversation with Genevieve about the arrangement. He had said, "Make sure you have it before Thursday." Thursday was the morning of the investor meeting. The morning she restructured my role in front of 11 people. She had not known about my conversations with Elliot. She had not known about the due diligence. She had not known what the Caldwell Group actually cared about, or why their interest in the firm was structured the way it was. She had been operating on the assumption she had held for months, that the firm's value was concentrated in the consulting practice and the brand she carried, and that the product division, while useful, was a support function, valuable, but not primary, successful but secondary. She had structured my role accordingly. I sat at my desk after the meeting and I thought about Thursday, about Elliot's call, about the 6 weeks of due diligence and the conversations I had chosen not to have with my wife, because I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I could decide how to deal with it. I had not been hiding from her. I had been building the space to have the most important conversation of our marriage, on the most honest possible terms. I had wanted to come to her with the full picture, with the understanding not just that I was valuable, but with the documented, verified, investor-confirmed proof of exactly how valuable and in what specific ways, and what the implications were for the company and for us. I had planned to have that conversation before Thursday. She had restructured my role before I had the chance. The meeting with the Caldwell Group was scheduled to resume after lunch. The morning session had been a general overview of the firm's performance and strategic direction. Genevieve had presented. I had contributed when called upon, which was twice, briefly, in the way you contribute when you have been publicly repositioned as a functional contributor, rather than a strategic leader. The afternoon session was supposed to cover the product division's growth metrics and licensing pipeline. It was supposed to be led by Marcus Hale, whose new role overseeing product development had been announced that morning. Marcus did not have the depth to lead that session. He had not built the framework. He had not run the due diligence. He had not had the 7 calls with Elliot Caldwell. He had not spent 3 years in the rooms where every number on every slide had been earned. I knew what was going to happen in the afternoon session. I knew it the way you know something when you have built every piece of the thing being examined and can see, from the outside, exactly where the structure will hold and exactly where it will not. I went to lunch alone. I ate at a small place 2 blocks from the office that I had been going to for 2 years, and where the woman at the counter knew my order, and had it ready before I finished sitting down. I ate slowly. I thought about my father designing bridges. I thought about my mother waiting for students to find the answer. I thought about the 9 years I had spent loving a woman who was brilliant and ambitious and occasionally blinded by both, and about the particular kind of love that survives not by ignoring the blindness but by deciding again and again whether the person is worth the patience of waiting for them to see. I thought about what Elliot Caldwell had said on our 7th call, the day before the meeting. He had said, "Nathan, whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that the Caldwell Group's position is clear. We are not in a position to proceed with this investment under an ownership and leadership structure that misaligns value and authority. We have been direct with you about what we see. We expect to be direct with the full leadership team tomorrow, and we are hoping that you will be in a position to receive what we have to say constructively, regardless of how the morning goes." I had said I would be. I finished my lunch. I walked back to the office. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I sat at my desk for 15 minutes. Then I took the elevator to the 8th floor where the conference room was, and I walked in 4 minutes before the afternoon session was scheduled to begin. Genevieve was already there. She was reviewing slides on her laptop. She looked up when I entered. Something moved across her face. Something she covered quickly, but not quickly enough. The Caldwell Group team came in behind me. Elliot Caldwell entered last. He was tall, gray at the temples, and had the particular physical ease of a man who had been in enough high-stakes rooms that none of them made him nervous anymore. He shook hands around the table. When he reached me, he held my hand a half-second longer than a standard handshake required and gave me a single, small nod. Genevieve saw it. I watched her see it. I watched the slight recalibration in her posture. The adjustment of the frame she had been operating inside all morning. The first crack in the certainty she had walked into the room with. The afternoon session began. Genevieve introduced Marcus as the new lead for the product division overview. Marcus opened his laptop. He pulled up the slide deck my team had prepared. He began speaking. He lasted 4 slides. Not because he was unintelligent. Marcus was smart. But smart and prepared are different things, and prepared for this particular room, with this particular audience, on this particular set of numbers, required 3 years of context that Marcus did not have and could not simulate. Elliot Caldwell asked the first question. It was technical and specific. It was about the contractual structure of the licensing agreements and whether the IP ownership was fully vested in the firm or whether there were any creator rights considerations that would complicate an investment's downstream asset position. Marcus answered. His answer was partially correct and structurally incomplete in a way that anyone with investment experience in IP-heavy businesses would immediately recognize. Elliot looked at Marcus. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at Genevieve. He said, "I wonder if Nathan might be better positioned to speak to this." The room went still. Not the polished professional stillness of a room full of people performing neutrality. The real stillness, the kind that arrives when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and every person in the room is simultaneously processing what it means. Genevieve's face did something I had not seen it do in a professional setting in 9 years. It became uncertain, not publicly uncertain, she was too skilled for that, but privately uncertain in a way that was visible to the 2 people in the room who knew her well enough to see what she looked like underneath the performance. I was one of them. I suspected Priya was the other. I said, "I am happy to address that." And I did. I addressed Elliot's question completely, specifically, and with the kind of precision that comes from having built the thing being discussed and knowing every joint and beam of it. I addressed the contractual structure of the licensing agreements. I addressed the IP ownership framework. I addressed the creator rights considerations and the steps we had taken to ensure full vested ownership resided with the firm. Elliot asked a second question, then a third. Then his colleagues began asking questions. All of them directed at me. All of them technical and specific and revealing in the aggregate a depth of due diligence that did not match the general investor posture the Caldwell Group had maintained during the morning session. They had not come to the afternoon session to receive information. They had come to confirm what they already knew. They had come to watch what happened when the person who built the thing was asked to speak about it in the same room as the person who had been installed to speak about it instead. Marcus stopped trying to lead the session somewhere between the 4th and 5th question. He did it gracefully, closing his laptop and sitting back in a way that said, "I understand what is happening here and I am choosing not to make it worse." I noted that. I noted it in the specific professional way I noted things I would need to return to. Because Marcus was smart and I had invested in him, and what happened in this room did not have to be the end of that. Genevieve sat at the head of the table and said nothing. She had stopped taking notes. She was watching the room the way a person watches something they set in motion suddenly move in a direction they did not intend. The session continued for 90 minutes. At the end of it, Elliot Caldwell closed his laptop and looked around the table with the measured, unhurried authority of a man who had been waiting for the right moment and had determined that it had arrived. He said, "I want to be direct with this group about where the Caldwell Group stands." The room was very quiet. "We have been conducting due diligence on Harlan Meridian for 8 months," he said. "We have reviewed the firm's financials, client relationships, brand position, and operational health. All of those elements are strong. Genevieve and her team have built something genuinely impressive." He paused. "But I want to be equally direct about where our investment thesis is actually anchored. The asset that makes this deal work, the asset that represents the long-term value creation we are investing in, is the product division, the Meridian framework, the Harlan Diagnostic Suite, the partnership licensing program, the recurring revenue infrastructure that, under the growth trajectory we have verified, will become the primary revenue source for this firm within 3 to 4 years." He looked at Genevieve. "That asset was built by Nathan. It is currently being managed by Nathan. The institutional knowledge, client relationships, and development roadmap associated with that asset reside with Nathan and his team. We have conducted extensive technical due diligence on this division, and our conclusion is that the investment risk profile changes materially if the leadership of that division changes." He said that last sentence the way careful people say things they want heard clearly, without emphasis, without drama, with the flat, factual delivery of someone who knows they do not need to raise their voice because the content itself is sufficient. Genevieve was very still. Elliot looked at her directly. "Our recommendation," he said, "and this is a recommendation we intend to formalize in our term sheet, is that Nathan be reinstated in a senior leadership role with explicit authority over product development and an equity stake that reflects the value of the assets he has created. We are happy to discuss the specific structure. We are not flexible on the principle." He paused. "We are also recommending that the board consider a co-leadership model for the firm as a whole during the investment period, with Genevieve leading client services and business development, and Nathan leading product and revenue infrastructure. We believe this structure most accurately reflects where value is created in this firm and most effectively mitigates execution risk for our investment." He picked up his coffee cup. He drank from it. He set it down. "I want to be clear," he said. "We are not here to interfere in anyone's management decisions or organizational structure. We are here because we want to invest in this firm, and we want that investment to be built on an accurate understanding of where the value lives. This morning's restructuring announcement raised concerns for our team that I felt an obligation to raise directly. I hope you will take them in that spirit." He looked around the table once more. "We will give you time to discuss among yourselves and would welcome a conversation with the full leadership team tomorrow morning before we return to New York. Thank you all for a productive afternoon." He stood. His team stood. They gathered their things with the efficient, unhurried professionalism of people who have said what they came to say and do not need to watch the aftermath to know it will be thorough. Elliot walked past me toward the door. He paused beside my chair. He placed one hand briefly on my shoulder. He said quietly so that only I could hear, "You built something remarkable. Make sure you get credit for it." Then he walked out. His team followed. The door closed. The conference room held 7 people in a silence so complete it had a texture. I did not look at Genevieve immediately. I looked at my hands on the table. My father's hands. My mother's patience. 9 years of building something in the background of someone else's visibility. The Meridian framework. The Harlan Diagnostic Suite. The licensing program. $2 million in recurring annual revenue. 43 partner firms across 11 states. 87% renewal rate. The architecture of an invisible man suddenly, completely, and permanently visible. I looked up at Genevieve. She was looking at me. And the thing I saw in her face in that moment was the thing I had been waiting 9 years to see. Not the performance, not the confidence, not the competence and the certainty and the professional control she wore as naturally as most people wore their own skin. Underneath all of that, there was the woman who had argued with me for 40 minutes at an event in Atlanta about a market segmentation model because I was the first person in the room who had actually read the numbers. That woman was present. She was looking at me. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, uncertain in a way that was completely honest. I spoke before anyone else could. "I would like to request that we adjourn for today," I said, "and that we reconvene tomorrow morning before the Caldwell group comes back. With just the 3 of us, Genevieve, Marcus, and me. Board member Christopher Vance, who had been a board member since the firm's 2nd year, and who had always maintained a careful neutrality between professional respect for Genevieve and what I believed was a privately accurate assessment of the firm's dynamics, nodded immediately. "I think that is the right call," he said. The room adjourned. People filed out with the careful, averted eyes of witnesses to something they are not sure they were supposed to see. Priya was last. She closed her notebook. She looked at me as she walked past. She did not say anything, but the look said something. It said, "I knew." It said, "I have known for a long time." It said, "I am glad someone finally said it out loud, even if it was not me, and even if it was said in the language of investment due diligence, rather than the language of simple human truth." I stayed in the conference room after everyone else left. I sat alone at the long table with the 8 empty chairs and the Atlanta skyline through the window, going from afternoon to early evening. The light shifting from gold to gray in the way it does in October when the season is changing, and the change is real but gradual, and you can watch it happening if you know to look. Genevieve came back. She opened the door and came in and closed it behind her and stood at the far end of the table for a moment. Then she walked to the chair closest to mine, the one that Elliot Caldwell had sat in during the afternoon session, and she sat down. She looked at me. I looked at her. The table between us was long and polished and held no paper and no laptops and no presentations, just the reflections of two people sitting in the last light of a day that had changed things permanently. "How long?" she said. Her voice was different than it had been all day. All the professional architecture was gone. It was just her voice. The voice I knew from 9 years of mornings and arguments and Sunday dinners and late nights and the particular quiet that lives between two people who know each other well enough to fight the way they had been fighting and still wake up in the same house the next morning. "Since May," I said. Elliot reached out in May. We had 7 calls over 6 weeks. His team did technical due diligence on the product division without my disclosing it to you, because Elliot requested the review be compartmentalized. I agreed because I needed to understand the full picture before I knew how to have the conversation we should have had months ago. She closed her eyes, briefly, the way people close their eyes when they are absorbing something they cannot unhear. "You should have told me," she said. "I should have," I said. "And I was going to. Before Thursday. I had planned to have the conversation with you before the meeting. You announced the restructuring before I had the chance." She opened her eyes. She looked at the table. "I know," she said. 2 words. The quietest 2 words she had spoken all day. The most honest. I sat with them. I let them be exactly as honest as they were. "The restructuring," I said, "I need to understand it. Not to relitigate it, to understand it. Because what I know is that it happened in front of investors and board members and your chief of staff, and I know that was not an accident. And I know that the decision was made 3 weeks after we had the argument about Marcus. And I know that Marcus is smart and ambitious and has been spending a lot of time in rooms with you that I have not been invited to. And I know that I have been watching our dynamic shift in ways I raised with you, and that you told me were about my ego. So I need to understand what you were trying to do. Because I love you and I have been your partner for 9 years, and the most important thing I can do right now is understand what actually happened between us before I decide what happens next." She was quiet for a long time. The room was very quiet. The building was settling into its evening sounds, the distant elevator, the HVAC cycling, the small ordinary sounds of a structure that exists regardless of the human drama happening inside it. "I was afraid," she said. I looked at her. "Of what?" I said. "Of you," she said. "Of how good you are at this." She gestured. A small, frustrated gesture that encompassed the room and the afternoon and the due diligence and the framework and the licensing program and everything that Elliot Caldwell had said. Of the fact that I built this company, and I am the CEO, and I am the person everyone knows and the person everyone quotes and the person who gets the calls and gives the talks and represents everything Harlan Meridian is. And somewhere in the last 2 years I started to feel like the thing I was representing was not really mine anymore. Like the most valuable part of it was yours. And instead of having the honest conversation I was afraid to have, I tried to make it structural. I tried to make you smaller so I could feel like the thing I built was still entirely mine. She said it the way people say true things they have been holding for too long. Not easily, but completely, without softening it, without the performance. Psychologists call this competitive displacement in collaborative relationships. When 2 partners of equal capability share a creative or professional endeavor, one will sometimes respond to the other's success, not by celebrating it, but by seeking to contain it, to establish structural boundaries around it that prevent the success from threatening their own sense of ownership and identity. It is not malice. It is fear operating as strategy. The result is the same either way. Someone gets smaller so someone else can feel larger. And both people end up living in a room with less space than either of them needs. I looked at my wife. I looked at the woman who had argued about market segmentation models and built a firm from nothing, and had the courage to say in a nearly empty conference room at the end of a very hard day that she had been afraid, and that fear had made her do something she already knew was wrong. I said, "I need you to hear something." She looked at me. "I did not build the product division to compete with you," I said. "I built it because it was what the firm needed, and because it was what I knew how to do, and because the work was worth doing. I have never wanted your chair. I have never wanted your name on the door or your face in the press or your voice in the rooms that matter. What I have wanted for 9 years is to be seen by you, not by investors or board members or 11 people in a conference room, by you. I have wanted you to look at me across a table in our own house and know, fully and honestly, what you are looking at. She was very still. Today, I said, for the first time since I cannot remember, you looked at me like that. In this room. After Elliot finished talking. You looked at me and you actually saw me. And I need to know if you can do that going forward. Not because of the Caldwell Group. Not because of the investment or the co-leadership model or the equity stake. Because of us. Because I am 41 years old and I have spent 9 years building things in the background of your visibility, and I am not interested in spending the next 9 years invisible in my own marriage. She did not respond immediately. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She looked at the window where the Atlanta skyline was fully into its evening configuration, lit and geometric and indifferent to the conversation happening in the conference room above it. Then she looked at me. I see you, Nathan, she said. I see you right now, and I am sorry it took this long, and I am sorry I made it take this long, and I do not know if that is enough. But it is true. I looked at her for a long time. I looked at the woman I had loved across 14 years of dinners and arguments and morning coffee and Sunday silences and the particular textured intimacy of two people who have built a life together that is both less and more than either of them imagined when they started. It is a beginning, I said. She nodded. The next morning we met with the Caldwell Group at 9 o'clock. Genevieve and I sat on the same side of the table for the first time in the process. We presented together. She led the sections on client relationships and business development. I led the sections on product architecture and revenue infrastructure. We handed each other slides. We referenced each other's work. We operated as what we had always been at our best. A complete unit. Two people whose capabilities were different and complementary and most powerful, when neither was trying to occupy the space that belonged to the other. Elliot Caldwell watched us for about 20 minutes. Then he put his pen down. He looked at his team. He looked back at us. This, he said, is what we were hoping to see. The term sheet arrived the following week. $8 million. A co-leadership structure formalized in the shareholder agreement. An equity allocation for me that reflected the value assessment his team had conducted, and a clause that Elliot had added personally, which his attorney told ours was unusual, and which Elliot, when asked about it, described as a standard protection for asset continuity. The clause specified that any material change to the product division leadership required board approval and Caldwell Group consent. He had made my role permanent in a legal document. I did not tell Genevieve that Elliot had added the clause before she had a chance to see it herself. She read the term sheet. She came to my office. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the one with the cracked armrest that I had been meaning to replace for 2 years, and that I had kept declining to replace for reasons I had never examined until that moment when she sat in it and looked at me, and I understood that the cracked armrest was just one more small thing I had kept as evidence that this office was mine, that something in this building was mine, in the years when nothing else clearly was. She said, "He put it in the contract." I said he did. She looked at the window. She looked at me. She said, "He did not need to do that if you had already said you were staying." I said, "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You asked him to." I said, "I asked him to consider it. The decision was his." She absorbed that, the honesty of it, the quiet, practiced 9-year honesty of a man who had spent a very long time building things in places where other people were not looking. Then she did something she had not done in my office in the 3 years I had worked in it. She stood up. She walked around the desk. She stood beside my chair and she put her hand on my shoulder, not the reflexive, automatic shoulder touch she had given me in the kitchen in front of her colleagues. Her hand, her real hand, present and intentional and carrying all the weight of a woman who had finally, completely looked at the man she was touching and seen him. I reached up and put my hand over hers. We stood like that for a while. Two people in a corner office on the fourth floor of a building in Atlanta, on a morning in October with the east light coming through the window at the angle that made everything in the room look warmer than it actually was. I want to speak to you now. Directly, if you are listening to this and you are the person who builds in the background, the person who holds things together invisibly, the person who has watched the recognition go somewhere else for long enough that you have started to wonder whether you are the problem, whether the invisibility is your fault, whether building quietly is the same as building for nothing. I want to tell you something that took me 9 years and one conference room and a due diligence report and a man named Elliot Caldwell to understand completely. Building quietly is not the same as building for nothing. It is building for the right moment. It is building with the patience of a person who understands that the thing you are constructing does not require an audience during construction. Only after. Only when it is finished and standing and load-bearing and the people around you have to walk through it every day and do not fully understand why it holds. You will have your moment. Maybe it will come from an investor. Maybe it will come from a colleague. Maybe it will come from the person who underestimated you finally, in a room that makes the truth impossible to avoid, being confronted with the full size of what you built while they were deciding how small you were. Or maybe it will be quieter than that. Maybe it will be a hand on a shoulder in a corner office. Maybe it will be 2 words. I see you. Said by the person whose seeing you needed most. Said late and honestly and with the full weight of everything it cost them to say it and everything it cost you to wait. Either way, when it comes. When the room finally understands what it was looking at, you will not need to say a single word. The work will have already said it. Stand next to it. Let it speak. And know, completely and without apology, that you were always exactly what you built. Visible or not, seen or not, acknowledged or not, you were always the thing that held.